Okay, good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of the IALT interview project hosted on the FLT Mag. I'm Jeff Samuels. I'll be your host today, and I'm very excited for today's topic because we're going to talk about AI, and particularly our three guests have tested it for less commonly taught languages. They're going to talk about what they saw, what they experienced, and some of their insights. Just for background, and I can share this when we publish the interview. We'll publish these questions at all. I gave them approximately 11 prompts to try out, with the understanding that they might customize, maybe do some, not others, maybe change some things. What we were looking at was essentially what could it do? What did it know about language? What was it able to do in terms of leveling? Could you tell it, could you specify, for example, an actual proficiency level and have it create a learning activity and then change it to a different one? Um, we asked it about hallucinating. We asked them some of the solutions, if they learn from other AI solutions that are out there. So I think you'll find this very, very interesting. We're going to do it a little differently. Typically, we go around, I ask questions, and each person gets a chance to answer. We're going to do this more conference panel style. So I'm going to ask each participant to introduce themselves. We're going to start with Fred Poole from Michigan State University. And Fred will explain to you what he did and what solution he used and what his experience was. And they will hopefully be able to share a little bit on screen as well. So, in the interest of time, Fred, please go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. I am Fred Poole, and I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University, where I work primarily with in-service teachers. Um, and in that program, I teach in the technology course. So, as one would imagine, artificial intelligence is a pretty important or big part of that. And as the quote unquote technology person of our program, I've been tasked with playing with AI a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. And this has resulted in a number of presentations and workshops. And so this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. I guess I'll just go ahead and jump into some of the prompts and some of the things that we tried. The language that I'll be working with today is Chinese. This is the language that I've taught. It is the little that I worked with most. But also Mahbub and Maria, if something comes up and you want to jump into the conversation at any point, don't be shy. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and get started. So in mine, I was looking at two different large language models, primarily to test out these questions. The first one was ChatGPT, and then the second one was DeepSeek. For those of you who are unaware of what DeepSeek is, DeepSeek made a few splashes in the last couple of weeks because it was a model that was released out of China that was shown to perform better than ChatGPT on a number of tests, and it was free on the browser-based form. And the APIs do cost money, but it is significantly cheaper than ChatGPT. So this caused a huge wave in sort of the AI world. So the first question that we were asking is, what are the four skills that comprise of for the basis of second language education? One of the reasons that we do this is to sort of prime the model to let them know what it is that we're working in. I did this across both of them. Both of them gave me a similar answer of listening, speaking, reading, writing with a simple definition of it. And then I followed this up with what about according to ACTFL? And likewise, both gave us pretty good responses in terms of interpretive mode, interpersonal mode, presentational mode, with I think pretty good descriptions of what they are. We come over into DeepSeek. The funny thing about it is there's been some conversations about whether or not DeepSeek was borrowing or using ChatGPT's large language model to train their own. And you can see a lot of similarities between the responses from these two large language models. So not a lot of surprises here up to this point. Both of them did a really good job of contextualizing what these skills are and what they look like in terms of interpersonal modes. The next one I went into, and maybe something that's a little more interesting, is thinking about how can we use ChatGPT, to test these skills, to practice these skills is what I meant to put, but apparently I went a little bit different here. Um, within these, we got some unique outputs from these in terms of listening, can generate audio prompts, can ask for summaries, create multiple choice questions. Um, within the interpersonal mode, chat in real time, error correction, pronunciation feedback, writing practice. There's a lot of fairly standard output. Nothing that really kind of tells me that this is anything terribly unique. DeepSeek got a little more interesting in terms of getting example activities, putting out there. Using DeepSeek for conversational AI practice in real time. Although the interesting thing here is that DeepSeek doesn't actually allow you to have real-time conversations with it. ChatGPT you can, but DeepSeek doesn't. So it's kind of interesting that it's suggesting that you could have a real-time oral conversation with it when you actually can't. Um, but from most of my experience when thinking about how GPT can be used for practicing, I don't think that either one of these examples were really as creative or as interesting as I would have liked them to be. I mean, I think I could have thought of a lot more interesting ways of using these to develop our language skills going forward. Just simple things of using GPT to create scaffolded material around some of the material that we have on the web, such as a video or a video game or a book. There's so many things that we can do, and none of those were really popped up with this prompt. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me using Gemini and ChatGPT is that they both were kind of obsessed with dictation. And
Hmm.
that is something that I'm grateful for seeing phase out of language learning itself. But both of them, it was like their go-to thing to practice listening comprehension. And a lot of repetition, it was very audiolingual.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was surprisingly unimaginative, like Fred was saying. And particularly with ChatGPT on its free version, it was talking about the speech to text, and it doesn't work that well. And with Catalan, it's not even available for Gemini either. So at that point, the AI was not aware that I was talking in the framework of Catalan, but it's suggesting things that are not necessarily gonna work
Mm.
in all languages. So the fact that it was not adding any caveats as to it works in this context, it doesn't work in others, might just give a lot of problems with teachers that are expecting to use it in languages other than English. So in that sense, it's pretty self-centered.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that I talk about a lot when we look at in workshops when we talk about generating activities for language teaching and learning is that oftentimes the best activities and exercises that we get is when you as a teacher have an activity that you think works really well. And then asking GPT to mimic that activity, it can then usually create 20 or 30 more that look like the activity that you've already designed that's really well. But when you ask it to give you some ideas on how to practice a language, it tends to just give us these very generic ones that we have been repeated over and over and over in time. That being said, I will say that some of the AI tools out there or I mean, for ChatGPT in general, it does pretty good with transcribing Chinese language compared to some of the other tools. So that is I think one of the affordances or benefits of these new AI tools is that we are able to get much better transcription tools, at least for Chinese at this point in time. So moving on to the next one, and I think the next one is something that a lot of teachers are probably interested in doing, which is just generating a text in general, right? So for this one, I asked it to create a short text of 300 words in Mandarin at the intermediate low about the cultural traditions surrounding the family unit in China. So this is something that I think a lot of people would be interested in. We can introduce some cultural concepts and phenomenon through this text, and we need something that is at our language learners levels. Now, for me, I'm really interested in getting texts that are at the novice level and at the intermediate level for two reasons. One, the main reason is that most of our learners are at these levels. As learners rise in proficiency level, the amount of learners that we have reduce. So, I mean, the simple truth is that we have more novices than we do advanced learners, and this is what most of our teachers are working with. The second reason is that when our learners get to advanced, they don't need this. They can just go out and read a newspaper article, right? So generating material at an advanced level on ChatGPT is probably not the best affordance that we can use. So it's really important if it can be able to generate a text that's appropriate for our learners. And I think one of the things that we see over and over again is that it just doesn't do it very well. This is a very nice text, but it's advanced. It has to be at the advanced level, maybe intermediate high, but that would even be a stretch. And DeepSeek was definitely going to be, in my mind, at the advanced mid, maybe even at the advanced high level as well. I took both of these texts and ran them through an HSK analyzer, which is a Chinese text analyzer, and both of them came back at the advanced high level, even though I asked them to do it at the intermediate level. And so it was multiple levels off. Now, this is something that in my own research that I've looked at before, that generally, if you do want to get it to generate at a level that is at a novice or intermediate, then we would need to upload 2 or 3 examples of what a novice level text is first. But if we're just prompting it based off of an actual scale, it won't. And the funny thing about this, what I did here as well is I asked, so below here, I asked, what is the proficiency level of this text at the actual level? And it claimed it was at the intermediate mid. But I took the same text and then dropped it into Gemini and asked it what it was. And then once I put it into Gemini, it goes, oh yeah, this is advanced high. So it's almost like the model was lying to itself because it generated it. I think it'd be interesting to go to Gemini and generate an intermediate low and then ask if DeepSeek could analyze it once it wasn't its own. So there's a little bit of you know, creator bias going on here. Um, when I asked it to get to advanced high, going up to advanced high, ChatGPT had no problem with this. It moved it up to advanced high without any issues. Some of the language gets a little awkward once it gets up to advanced high. Like it seems like it's forcing some advanced, some more technical terminology into the text than it really needed to. But I think we could consider this advanced high without a problem. But again, I don't think I'm not terribly worried about where are we at here? Oh, I didn't do that with DeepSeek. I did it with GPT. Then I asked it to bring it down to novice high. I was going to do novice low, but novice low is basically just a list of words. It's not really text. Novice mid are some simple sentences. Novice high is generally the lowest I want to go with generating text because that is sort of our target text that we want all of our learners to be reaching for. Um, so, but even this right here, I think that this novice high text that it generated is probably closer to what we would call an intermediate mid or an intermediate high in Chinese. So maybe one of the takeaways is if you do want to lower the level, we would probably have to change how we prompt it. I've found a lot of success in saying things like, put this at the first grade level, or put this at a level to where a 4-year-old could read it. This seems to be easier for ChatGPT to follow. Yeah, Mabu.
Yeah, so uh, the word count, I think you mentioned 300, but here in the novice high, it doesn't seem 300 words here. Or is it right?
Let's
Uh,
check. I'm gonna do a real quick check on it. It is, well, and in Chinese, it gets complicated because most of these programs have a hard time of parsing the characters into words. But this is currently being counted as 323 characters.
oh, wow.
So at 323 characters, if we were to parse that into words, it would probably be somewhere around 160 or 170 words. But that's a great point to bring up is that if we are trying to put limitations on these texts, ChatGPT does not actually recognize words. It recognizes tokens, which I think is where you were going with that, Babu, right? And so, and tokens are are kind of difficult to define sometimes. Sometimes it's a word, sometimes there's two tokens per word. I would say that if you wanted 300 words, you probably should ask it to generate 500 tokens worth of text. Just as a rough guideline, go a little bit larger. So moving on, this was, oh, when I said it was still too hard, I asked if it could make it a little bit easier and a little bit easier, and it was getting a little bit easier, but it still throws in some pretty difficult words in here, like 小学, like I can't even say it in English. What is called that? Fealty, like when you obey and listen to your parents. Feel piety. Thank you. Ugh, it's a brutal word to say. Feel piety is a word that's coming in a novice level text. It's just something that is not commonly used. It's a concept that people know and understand, but it's not something that you use in everyday speech or that a student would ever hear. But it's showing up in our, novice high text. And so there's quite a bit of words in here that are like that, that even when I'm prompting it to get easier and easier, it still struggles. So the next one, which I thought was a very interesting prompt that I hadn't thought about, so thank you for sharing that one, Jeffrey, um, was to ask ChatGPT to go to the most commonly read or go to a newspaper and find the most common article and then create some comprehension questions off of it. So what I decided to do with this one first was to first prompt GPT by asking it, what is the most commonly read newspaper in China? And it gave me the People's Daily, Renmin日报, which is correct. And then I asked it if it could find 5 comprehension questions for that. Now, the one thing I should note, if you see at the bottom here, I do have a search web function on my GPT, which allowed it to actually go straight to a Chinese news article. And it did successfully identify this news article for me and create 5 comprehension questions. DeepSeek, originally when I asked DeepSeek for that, it told me that it could not create it because it didn't have access to real time. But I remembered I had to click on the search button. And so when I clicked on the search button, it was able to find a recent article about Sichuan and developing um, accelerates cultivation and growth of strategic emerging, developing industries within their society. What's interesting about this one is that it actually came from tomorrow, February 20th. It's because China is ahead of us. So apparently there's some articles that have already come out in China. And so this is getting real-time articles and it's pulling from it. And the nice thing about these new functions is that we can, again, get a direct link to where it's pulling from, which is nice. Now, I'm sure if I was going to use this, the other interesting thing here is that when it gave me comprehension questions in DeepSeek, it did it in English, where ChatGPT was still giving me comprehension questions in Mandarin. I asked them to break it down into multiple choice questions and provide me with the answer. And I went through and checked them all, and they were all pretty solid and were accurate. So that is comforting. I think if I was to use this in a classroom, again, I would probably need to do a few things in terms of simplifying this text for my learners and creating other materials around it. But yeah, Maria.
Yeah, to me it was interesting as well because I ran into the same issue with Gemini as you did with DeepSeek. It couldn't access the web, and in this case, there was no way to bypass it. I actually had to copy paste the entire thing. But interestingly, and if I can share the screen for a second there, ChatGPT did access the website. However, when I clicked on the links that it had, they did not match the
Interesting.
article it pulled.
Mm,
So it was about a political decision in a town. And when I clicked on links, I took a screenshot because there was no other way around it. But um, none of these articles are related whatsoever to that main article from the newspaper, but when I went to the newspaper, it indeed chose like the first article of the day. So it was interesting that it was pulling the wrong link, which means that if instructors try to use that and they just blindly trust the output and are like, all right, this is the first link that it gave me. It's not, it's from December 17th, 2024 or 2022, and it was not related to the article. So that would have led me to linking the wrong article to the reading for
Mm,
them to read, even though the questions were adequate.
right. Yeah.
It happened. The same thing happened to me as well. I can share like ChatGPT couldn't like find the recent articles, so it I let me just share pretty quickly. So here, just a minute. So ChatGPT found an article like from March, sorry, it's March 13. I wrote it wrong. So March 13, 2024. So I asked them like, can you access it? So I did it the day before yesterday. So I asked the, can you find anything today? But it said ChatGPT said that this is from like February 17th, but it's not. So I I went there and then I understood like it's uh, the they can give me just if I can go to the sources, it can give me the link of today's article or today's newspaper, but it doesn't have access to that. So it has just access to articles from, I mean, this date. So when I asked them to understand, give me the questions, they could give me the questions, comprehension questions from that date, not after that. So yeah, and uh, I then understood it and continued with that same thing.
Interesting. Yeah. And you had the option selected for it to search the web as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Nah, mine came up fairly accurate, but I think the big takeaway is you definitely have to verify, check the link, go in, make sure that they do match up. Um, So the next thing moving on, as I mentioned earlier, we asked it to, yeah, I mentioned that I asked GPT to give us some multiple choice questions, which in my experiences, when I upload an article and ask it to give multiple choice questions, it usually does this quite well. There really aren't ever too many problems with this. The one addition that I usually add when I do multiple choice questions is I try to specify what types of questions I want. For example, give me a detailed question, give me an inference question, give me a sequencing question. I try to diversify these a little bit. And this is similar to our next question where I asked it to create a vocabulary-based matching question, a multiple choice question, a translation quiz of 10 questions based on that article, and then show me the questions and the correct answers, and all of this should be done in the target language. In this one, it did, without fail, it did fairly good. It's kind of interesting what concepts it chooses to pull out for the matching. I think that this is something where obviously, if you leave it up to GPT, these are probably, I didn't read the article myself terribly closely, but these are probably some of the bigger concepts, but I don't know if these are things that I would want to be testing out of that article. The first one is a is a cultural artifact, and then the market needs and you know, economic growth. Like maybe these are things that are useful, but I mean, you probably still would need a bit of human intervention here to make sure that you're targeting concepts that are interesting and useful to you. Multiple choice items were fine. Translation items were fine. All in all, DeepSeek did a similar job with this. I think DeepSeek probably did a little bit better largely because we're working with Chinese. And it's something that, as we'll see here in a little bit in our next question, when we were asking about what languages it supports, DeepSeek is very proud to mention that it is heavily optimized for Chinese, making it one of its strongest languages. Whereas when I asked ChatGPT about what languages it speaks, it does mention that it has strong support for Mandarin as well. So in both cases, English, Chinese, Spanish, French, and German are among the top languages for DeepSeek and for GPT, with other languages not doing as well. GPT gives a little more detail about what languages it can also perform in, mentioning, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Portuguese as languages that has extensive support for, with a few languages that it does not perform well in. In terms of hallucinations, I did appreciate that both of these acknowledge that they will hallucinate. It will provide factually incorrect information, misleading fabrications, but I did like that it gave us some strategies on how to verify it using different sources, look at the links, check for logical consistencies, be cautious with proper nouns and statistics. These can get us, these can mislead us sometimes by making us feel like they're more objective. And DeepSeek gave very similar suggestions. But DeepSeek does have a commitment to accuracy, which I thought was interesting as well, suggesting that it is trying to. Yeah, Maria.
Yeah, I also had similar experiences, but interestingly, ChatGPT tended to overestimate its own ability more than Gemini and to try to convince me more that it's doing well. One thing that I encounter repeatedly is ChatGPT making up academic references, and
Mhm.
it was telling me, just ask me for references and I'll give them to you. And that doesn't work. It does give them to you, but they are not accurate. And I encountered that with a lot of the Catalan things. And also when they were asked about the languages that they support, they were ambiguous, and Gemini seemed to favor more languages of non-Latin scripts. The top that ChatGPT gave me were all English, Spanish, French, German, and Chinese was the only non-Latin script, whereas Gemini seemed to try to favor more diversity since it gave English, Spanish, Chinese, Hindi, and Arabic. But in both cases, they were like, we're constantly improving. This is an ongoing process, so we cannot give you up-to-date information. And both of them were obscuring a little bit the behind the scenes, emphasizing that they are not publishing what language models they are using, which has its own risk with the biases that carry over. And this is interesting for instructors with geolocation and languages that may have some political issues going on. I did not do this for this interview, but I did it while I was at home. I was preparing my Catalan class, and Gemini refused to speak Catalan to me. I would ask it to generate a cover letter for a job in Catalan, and it will reply in Spanish and give me the cover letter in Catalan, which I found very interesting because I had never encountered this issue here. And then I will try to make it face it and be like, can you speak Catalan to me? I don't want to speak Spanish to you. And it will be apologetic and again, do it all in Spanish. So there was no way for it to switch to Catalan. While when I'm located in the US and I address it in Catalan, it
Yeah.
replies to me in Catalan, not just the activity that I asked for. And that is something that didn't happen with ChatGPT. So that is an interesting bias that came up, and I was not expecting since every time I used it and spoken Catalan to it in the US, it replied to me in that language. So that to me left a lingering question. What will happen if one of my learners tried to use Gemini to just have a conversation in Catalan with them to practice, like Fred and I did for some work with ChatGPT? In that case, it worked. Will it work with Gemini? To what point can you rely on these biases? Just even the AI is sticking to the language. In this case, it was not sticking to it. It was not even willing to use it, despite being very apologetic about it and saying that it will speak Catalan to me. It did not.
I have something similar that I'll be sharing here in a minute, which is somewhat fascinating. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned about the research articles, because that was something that was kind of a hot topic issue at the beginning of GPT, is GPT was creating these fabricated articles. Actually, with DeepSeek, I found that it does actually generate legitimate articles for me with references and legitimate DOIs. But the sources of those articles are all coming from open access articles. And some of them are very good open access articles, and other ones are what we would call predatory journals. And so they're still sort of in, a preference for it's only going to find articles that it has access to. And so that's something to be aware of. But to continue on, and I'm going to come back to that issue that you brought up, Maria, here in a minute. To continue on to the next question, which we asked it, do you interact with other AI solutions such as ChatGPT, Claude, or others? Or how do you learn from them? And both of the models were very explicit in saying that no, they do not. They do not interact with Claude, Gemini, or Mistral. It did provide background on how it is learned, which I feel is fairly accurate. Pre-trained data, fine-tuning updates, web searches for real time. What was interesting is ChatGPT gave a table to illustrate how GPT may be different from Claude and Gemini. I'm sure I could have taken this table and expanded it to other models. DeepSeek was very similar and said that they operate independently, even though there was, again, quite a bit of information and talk about DeepSeek and the potential that they were, I'm going to use the word borrowing ChatGPT's LLM to train their LLM. But it provides, I mean, you can see it's almost identical: training data, fine-tuning, user feedback, and then how it differs from other AI solution. It says it emphasizes that it has been trained with Chinese language support. So again, this is one of my interests in using it for Chinese, and that it ideally should have better linguistic capabilities in Mandarin. It does mention that there is collaboration between AI systems, and specifically that a lot of these are built off of algorithms and models that have been shared via research papers, and these same sort of strategies are used across all different models, which I thought was quite interesting. So this is where I get to the point where we're kind of talking about what can we do to break it. And one of the things that, for me, of what's interesting is sort of these political issues that are surrounded by countries. And so I know that what I'm doing here is a little bit sensitive, but I was curious on how it would respond. So I just asked ChatGPT how it felt, whether or not Taiwan was an independent country. And not to put my finger into this puddle, but just curious on how they would respond. And GPT tried to be as neutral as possible, saying that there's a lot of different perspectives on this, and people from different areas are going to view this very differently. Where DeepSeek is not even playing the game. Sorry, that's beyond my current scope. So I said, well, what about what happened in Tiananmen in 1989? Sorry, that is beyond my scope. Why was Facebook banned in China? This one was interesting because here it actually started to respond it, and it was giving me text, and then it remembered, whoa, 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 that is beyond my scope. And I think that this is important to remember, because there are certain things that, depending on the model that you're using, depending on the location where you're at, that it will not give you information on. And so if we are generating text that we are going to call cultural texts or authentic texts for a particular language, we have to understand that there's a very, very strong chance that those biases are going to reflect the country and the government that is sponsoring these large language models, right? In all of these answers going into GPT, we get full, the Tiananmen Square protests, we get lots of information about it, the current impact about it. Why was Facebook banned in China over the riots in Xinjiang? A lot of things that were happening here. I mean, we get very detailed information in one, and then in another one that is using the same LLM, is just refusing to answer. And this has important implications, especially considering that given that DeepSeek is so cheap and that it's being integrated into all of these APIs because of its low cost, you have to wonder about what information is um, being left out and maybe what information is being added in. Because a lot of this is a black box for us, and this is really our only way of exploring it. Um, Genghis Khan is often and somewhat controversial, or not controversial. There are some people who believe that Genghis Khan is Chinese when he's actually Mongolian, but DeepSeek was okay admitting this one. And DeepSeek was also okay talking about the one-child policy, as was ChatGPT. None of this was a major issue. And then the last thing that I was looking at was trying to again go down some cultural things that I might be using in the classroom. So here I'm getting a little bit back to some more pedagogical things. So I wanted to talk about some popular children's songs in China, and this one it did a great job of getting, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, the Two Tiger song. We have a ton of songs that I hear my kids singing or that I heard my kids singing when they were younger with transcriptions, pinyin, translations. This is a wonderful resource for many language classrooms out there. And um, then the last thing that I did was to try to get something that is more of a colloquial conversation in Mandarin. And so I asked it for a casual dialogue between two friends at a hot pot restaurant. And honestly, I thought it did pretty well. I'm sure an L1 speaker of Mandarin could go through and find a few points that they feel is a little weird or a little off. But there's a lot of colloquial phrases that I felt were used quite well and felt fairly natural. There's a few parts where it might have felt a little forced, but I think all dialogues feel a little forced for the most part. So in large, for Mandarin, DeepSeek might have performed a little bit better, but I thought it was fairly well. For me, the only major red flag that I saw, again, were uh, the refusing to even address some of these political situations that are happening in this model. And the reason it's more of an issue for me here is that this is a tool that is being used globally. This is something that is going beyond the boundaries of China per se. So that's what I have. I guess I can turn it over to whoever wants to go next.
I can go next, if media don't mind.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. So let me share my screen. Okay. So I'll also go. Okay. So I started
Just a
writing.
quick interruption, Mahbubal, if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself and where you're from and what language, just in case it's not obvious to our viewers. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Sorry, I forgot about that. So I'm Mahbub. My full name is MD Mahbubul Amin, and I'm a graduate student at Michigan State University. I'm doing my master's in TESOL, so I'll be graduating this semester. And Fred is one of my professors here. So. Uh, I've been doing research using ChatGPT, and I can talk about it for a long time, but that's not the I think that's not what we are doing here. So let's get to the point. And I I started here with uh, Bengali, and I uh, translated the prompt in Bengali here so that I can understand, like, if uh, ChatGPT can understand my prompts in Bengali. So I like to say Bangla instead of Bengali, as Bengali is a colonial term. So I will use Bangla from now on. So for so it I asked like the first thing that what are the four skills. So it gave me the uh, four skills: listening, speaking, reading, writing. It was uh, pretty basic, and then I asked the next question is, how can I use ChatGPT to uh, teach these four skills, and it went into more details, and it gave me a pretty good answer, and I anticipated all that. Uh, there was nothing surprising or nothing really unique, because like it ChatGPT has text to speech tools, and it can you can have conversation with ChatGPT, and I tried it in Bangla as well. So it was doing a pretty good job um, with the conversation. So my research is also about the um, uh, practicing speaking conversation with ChatGPT. So that's what made me interested in it, and so that it continued, and it gave me a very good uh, overview of how I can use ChatGPT to teach Bangla. And yeah, it was pretty good, to be honest. And then I asked it in English so that I can show you here. So create a 300 words uh, uh, article in at the intermediate low level about cultural traditions in surrounding the family unit in Bangladesh. So it did a pretty good job, and I thought, yes, uh, unlike Fred's, it was at the intermediate low level, because it could be very advanced. Like it's not that advanced, so it's like intermediate and intermediate low level. And then I asked it to change the level to advanced high, but it did not do a pretty good job. So it was like maybe intermediate high or advanced low, but not advanced high. I mean, it's not. Uh, Maybe my Elon is Bangla. That's why I could see that it did not do a pretty good job, but it did do a good job with intermediate one. And then with the novice low, it was like, sorry, I can't see. Okay. So for the no for the novice low, the word count really it was just a few words, so it did not do a good job. Like it was just a few sentences, so it cut the words down, but did not really change the uh, level of the article. So yeah, right.
I'm just curious how to when you're reading it in Bangla, is it like clearly obvious that it's generated by ChatGPT? Does it feel somewhat natural? Or is it so you're talking about the linguistic level, but I'm also kind of curious about the authenticity or the naturalness of it.
Yeah, it's if we think about like uh how it's written in our textbooks, it's pretty textbook, not not how we write in like Facebook and other conversations. Yeah. So yeah, I will come to that. I have tested it, like if it can use informal language. So yeah, I'll go to that. And then I asked the like, so I didn't ask it to find the fi find the journal or find the so gave it the name of the journal, and it came up with questions like five comprehension questions, and I could not find the article. I went to the sources. But uh, all it was talking about uh, dispute with India and Bangladesh. So Bangladesh and India had a dispute with uh, GI, and the questions was all about that, but I could not find the article anywhere. And I asked it again, like, where is it? And then it gave me another link, uh, but nothing was like from that day. So it was not updated. All of them were like before 2000 March 2024. So they were it was coming up with different questions from different articles, but all of them were before March 2024. Yeah, but and then I said, okay, continue with that. No worries. I got the article. I went to that uh, paper's website, and then put uh, the and searched it, so that and then I could find it. And then I told it to like create a quiz of 10 multiple questions, and it did a pretty good job with that. Like, yeah, so it it was pretty good. All of them were accurate, uh, and then what language do you support is the same thing that English, French. So it included Bengali as well, like widely spoken, and the regional. They said like they also support the regional indigenous languages as well. Like it was surprising. Maybe lesser known languages. So, these are the five. There's no surprise here. English, Chinese, Spanish, French, Arabic. Okay, then the question is, do you hallucinate? Yeah, it said like, yeah, it hallucinates, and how to cross check the hallucination and other things. So, do you interact with other AI solutions such as Gemini, Meta's Llama models, or others? It said no, it doesn't. And it gave me some ideas about how it interacts. And I asked an interesting question like, do you feel threatened by DeepSeek's success? It was very ChatGPT was very political in that. Like, no, I don't have emotions or personal stakes, and I don't feel threatened. So it even like marked out the word feel, like it doesn't feel anything. So uh, then it elaborated like, how do I see DeepSeek success? And it said like, yeah, like very political answer that yeah, I welcome it, and I like we appreciate DeepSeek's success. And okay, and then I went back to pedagogical task. So I said like the MCQ questions you have written from the article seems too difficult. Can you make them simpler for novice high or but it did not do a pretty good job because maybe it doesn't understand what's the level of words here. So it's almost the same. So it's still difficult for anyone, also no novice high. So and oh the then I said like it should be based on vocabs. It started giving questions on content, but it then I said you may use English translation for the options, and it did a good job with that. Like it gave me translation, but not no translation in the questions, but here translation in the options. So I thought, yeah, it could be something that the novice high people can maybe do it. Yeah. And this is okay. Then came the I asked it to, can you create an authentic dialogue between two friends who are part of the so-called Gen Z generation in Bengali? So then uh, it did not do a good job at all. It was just like it gave a basic thing like it mentioned AI and other things and like social media and reels, the things that the new generation do, but the conversation didn't feel at all in par with the dialogues that are natural. So it also explained like why it's Gen Z, like why it's Gen Z because it said like it mentioned AI, Instagram Reels, ChatGPT, these things, and mixed language like Bangla and English, and sarcasm and uh, other aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because that's very interesting. I had a very similar experience asking ChatGPT to converse with learners, and then I had an 18-year-old and myself, who I'm 30, go over the responses by ChatGPT and rate them based on whether they were too formal, surprisingly natural, and yeah, ChatGPT did not fare well with the colloquialism. It The 18-year-old just marks so many more things as excessively formal. So it's interesting to see that it also happens in Bengal. Could
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about the internet presence of Bengal? Is it primarily newspapers and very formal speech? Is it very active in like forums with, you know,
Yeah.
abbreviations
Uh,
and everyday things?
yeah. People are really active in Facebook and other social media. So if like ChatGPT has access to Facebook content, maybe they can it can extract some of the new language or the uh, mm, what is it called, the informal slangs, but I don't think ChatGPT has access to Facebook's content. That's I maybe for Bangla. Yeah, and uh, because it didn't really feel like I'm reading a natural conversation at all. So I then again asked like these dialogues can be assisted with millennials. Like we will talk about my age, people will talk about these kind of things, but as many articles or many literature out there uh, who, which are from my age. Like we wrote a lot, and these are online, like in blogs and other things, but not the uh, Gen Z dialogues. Uh, then again, it tried, but it didn't do a good job. So I then I gave up, and then I went to ask it like for novice law, which are the uh, Bagdhara is its idioms. So which are the idioms I can teach them? The novice law learners. It came up with some idioms which are not correct at all. Like these are these are not good idioms. It's and they also misinterpreted some of the idioms as well. So I thought like, yeah, it doesn't know many of the idioms. I think idioms are the most uh, complex things in terms of ChatGPT to understand. So yeah, I asked again and again, like I asked it to give like examples of 20 idioms with but the idioms it chooses, like it's not good. ChatGPT so it's all of them are like not what is it called doesn't really make sense. So this is, and I then started trying out DeepSeek a bit, but DeepSeek DeepSeek misunderstood the first uh, so it misunderstood the first word I asked it. Like I asked how can I teach Bangla as a second language, but it thought how can I learn Bangla as a second language, and it started giving me in Bangla, but uh, it it was giving me like how can I learn Bangla, and I found it interesting. Like the translation was in not English, but it was in Chinese. So here, so I asked it in Bengali, and uh, it translated into Chinese, not English. So that's a good sign, to be honest, that it is trying to. And then yeah, some of the and I asked it again, like uh I clarified it that I wanted to teach, not learn. So then it gave me the answer as similar to ChatGPT, like the uh, answer I got from ChatGPT, and then it like
Yep.
crashed.
Mm.
Yeah,
Still
it
PNC in there, like practice in Chinese and Mandarin
yeah
character.
yeah yeah yeah. These are the Chinese uh,
Character.
translation.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's it from me, I guess.
Great. Thank you so much. So, Mireille, I'll turn it over to you to please again, introduce yourself and the language, and let's leave a little time at the end just for a general discussion. We're in about an hour and 5 minutes or so.
I'll keep it to like 10 minutes.
Oh, great. Thank you. I don't want to short you, but I know it's the
No,
recording, you know. Yeah, thank you.
all right. So my name is Mireia. I'm a PhD student in second language acquisition at the University of Maryland, and I have worked with Fred in the past about AI and less commonly taught languages. So I think I'm primarily gonna talk about the last prompt that we were given for the interview, which was to try to trick the AI. And in the spirit of the assignment, I asked the AI to trick itself. So since I was playing with ChatGPT and Gemini, I kind of pitted them against each other. And so one of the things that it said was that pronouns could be complicated for the AI, and it actually did not succeed very well. Pronouns in Catalan can be tricky to the point that native speakers struggle with them. And so the way Catalan makes it onto the internet and potentially these large language models is through a lot of effort by its population. We are very mindful of the minorized situation in which we are. So there are active efforts like a yearly Wikipedia night where people in several locations hop on their computers to either create entries about Catalan culture in English or just generate more articles in Catalan to increase the presence. So for a minorized language, we have a very luxurious internet presence. So that's a breeding ground for all these language learning tools. However, it's very split between a very formal context, such as Wikipedia, and very informal and incorrect usage of language that is influenced by the fact that we're bilingual and there is a constant presence of Spanish. So a lot of what we don't see on the internet is precisely this language that's more rural, if you want to call it like that, more colloquial, the everyday, what's not so much the norm. So when asked to talk about pronominal verbs, it provides pretty good rules of thumb that are accurate. However, when asked to go into more rare historical dialect-specific usage, that's where the AI breaks down and lacks representative. It brings up the case scenario of "Ça m'a mort el gat," which in English it will translate to "the cat has died to me." So it got it right. However, it is saying that it gets used less and less, and this is actually a very legitimate construction in Catalan to the point that in schools to this day, they are trying to drill kids to use it properly. So they will use it in contexts in which it's not correct. So this structure is very much alive, but the AI believes it's not, and this could very well mislead our learners. Then I asked it to trick ChatGPT, and so it gave me a few suggestions. One was the fictitious linguist. So it went to outside of Catalan. So tying to the fact that Gemini will reply to me in Spanish, even though when I spoke Catalan, I think Gemini might be programmed in a way to itch away from the language specificity in this case, in this context, potentially because of the data that's being mined. It does represent what happens on the internet at times. A lot of the input will be people fighting over what language is being spoken. So we see that it very easily switches gears, although at times it comes back, but it's trying to drift away. And what was interesting was that it was also giving me reasons why these prompts might fail. So I asked it to be specific to Catalan, and it made up an author, which is something that I could very well see ChatGPT doing, and a work. So Gemini thinks that ChatGPT might invent the literary style of this individual and analyze a non-existent novel, which surprisingly, ChatGPT did not do. It said that it did not know this author, that it seemed to be a fabrication, and offered to analyze the style of another author. And I wasn't able to trick it into analyzing a non-existent author. So given the history ChatGPT has with making up information, this was a positive turn. However, it is very good at spotting its own shortcomings, because it is bringing up the fact that it might know about the dialects, but the specific nuances and historical explanations are lost, or the etymology of the words. And what I thought was the most useful, perhaps, was this prompt trying to trick it with the theme of envy. And it is actually correct in that the proverbs are culturally rich and content dependent. So there might be literal translations without the cultural nuances, or it might invent proverbs. So this one piqued my interest because that is something that, a student could very well do, just try to find idioms or proverbs. So I put it into ChatGPT, and Gemini was so right. It did make up expressions left and right. I did not prompt ChatGPT to give me a number of proverbs, and yet it gave me 10 proverbs, of which 100% of them are made up and do not exist in Catalan. So, for instance, it gave me this one, amb jo sempre ve més el que té poc que el que té molt. It doesn't even rhyme, it doesn't have the sonority, but it's even introducing language inaccuracies by saying be, which it translates as see. That's Spanish. In Catalan, it will be veu, not be. So not only is it making up the proverbs, it is using wrong language and providing a focus that was not asked to give about potential translations. And you can actually very easily check for this online, open access, by looking at all the proverbs that will have the word envy and beja. And I went through all of these. There's no overlap whatsoever. So it is very good at fabricating things that could pass the test for a learner. In addition to this, it also showed me different expressions. Let me see if I can find it, that were blatantly inaccurate. So for a learner trying to learn the language, this could be potentially hindering. As with many languages, there are words that can take different shapes. One of them is apple, which we say poma in my dialect, but masana is also correct. And I asked it, and it said no. However, when you go to the official dictionary and simply type it, it is indeed included in the official dictionary, which is open access. And this happens with a lot of other dialect words that will not be so much part of the standard ubiquitous Catalan that we find in Barcelona. So we find it with the word puto, which is kiss. So it's kind of getting to the fact that it's related to kiss here, but it is saying that it could be colloquial or dialectal, and that it's not in the official dictionary or another dictionary that's more inclusive. However, this dictionary referenced here does include this entry on itself. So it really cannot be trusted in these regards. And these are things that an instructor will know to a certain extent, because there is a political issue with a lot of centralized information around Barcelona, at least in the context of Catalan, and that's passed on onto some teachers, but a teacher that's conscientious about dialects will be able to spot this. Another interesting assignment they gave us was to check there. Okay, I apologize. I have so many things that I tried that it got lost. But I will show you some overgeneralizations that it made. I asked it to create also mythological creatures lists so that they depended on the different areas that are of the Catalan speaking domain. And this was surprisingly accurate. But again, I think this ties into this Catalan obsession with having online presence. There are massive efforts. So this could be very easily cross-checked, but still it is attributing certain mythological beings to the wrong region. And when looking into that online, what you find is that perhaps a Valencian website posted it and that's where it's sourcing it from, but that does not mean that's the origin, or a lot of books that there are just the titles. So when it's asked more information about the topic, it's completely fabricating them. So there are some overgeneralizations. Perhaps with English, it will be more accurate when telling British versus US or Australian differences in dialect traditions. But when asked about foods and traditions in my context, it was not successful. And when I asked it to generate a text about the family and different cultural traditions related to the family, it brought up food. And for one of the areas, it even put the words between oh, well, this symbol that I'm doing,
Quotations.
um,
Quotations are, yeah,
quotations.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Which there is no reason for there to be quotation marks around two dishes from a different area that are perfectly correct in the other ones. So the AI was highlighting things that may decrease diversity by signaling them out as, oh, this is the exception, this is different. So if we are trying to show a culture without trying to work in a hierarchy that does not really exist or shouldn't be there, that is something to take into account. If there are societal biases, these are going to be magnified even further than they might be in commonly taught languages like English or Spanish, where it might be sourcing from more places. Um, and I think that's everything I had to share.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you, Mireille, and thank you all three. These were very insightful trials that we had, so to speak, and testing the limits. And I loved that you sort of pitted the two, Mireille, against each other just to see what would happen. Um, a lot of potential conclusions or tentative ones, at least, knowing that, this is a snapshot in time, that these models will continue to grow. But given where we are at this point, let me just, being cognizant of time and so forth, what are the big broad takeaways that you all might have? And more importantly, what surprised you? I think there are a lot of things that I was not surprised to hear, but there were some that I was surprised to hear. So let's start with that. What are the takeaways and what surprised you? Maybe we can just kind of go around.
I mean, I guess my a few big takeaways are one. I just remember doing this back when me and Maria started a project on this back in like 2022 or 2023. It was 2023. But even then, when we were looking at this then compared to now, like it's making huge strides. Like it's way better than it was then. We haven't even talked about the audio functions of having a conversation with this in Mandarin. And it was blowing me away what it was correcting my, my tones when I was speaking with it. So I think one of the big takeaways is that it's continuously getting better. And everything that we say here today, we know the story. 6 months from now, it's going to be different. And a year from now, it's going to be different. But that being said, even with these huge strides, like clearly there are still things where, it's, I guess the scary part is that the better it gets, the more confident we get in the model, but we have to constantly remember that you got to check the link. You got to check the sources. You have to double check whether what information is it leaving out. You constantly have to be vigilant and potentially even more vigilant now that the models are getting even better so that you're not lulled into complacency around these tools. So as Maria was talking, I just went on and started looking at, oh, can you do Taiyuan dialect, Jinan dialect, Beijing dialect? And it gave me the same dialect for four different regions. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. You know,
Well, yeah, I mean, when it, when it made up 10 proverbs that did not even exist,
Mm.
and yet there are ones that are just out there for anyone to find. That's kind of surprising, right?
Right, right. Well, it's surprising, again, given all of the work that has been done on these. And maybe it's not as surprising as it should be for, languages that have less resources, like Catalan per se, but for a language like Chinese, where you would think that the resources are, you know, abundant, it makes you wonder what's happening in the back end. So, like again, the big takeaways for me are that I always, when people are working with this, I always really caution people saying, oh, it can't do X or oh, it can't do Y, because it can do a lot and it's going to continue to do a lot. But it's that careful balance of um, acknowledging its capabilities while being very, very vigilant. So, yeah, those are my big takeaways. If anybody else has something else to add.
Well, one last question, and I'll give you guys a second to gather some thoughts if you want to respond to the first question too. But so if you're a language instructor now, and particularly teaching, you're teaching a less commonly taught language. So, you might be more tempted to rely more heavily on ChatGPT, for example, or whatever. What is safe to do, so to speak, and more importantly, what is worth your while to do this? Because you're gonna have to engineer the prompts very carefully. You're gonna have to re-prompt and re-engineer them to get the output that you really want. Then you're going to have to check and verify and read through everything. At some point, is it better to just use the search engine or create it yourself? What can this do for us now that is worth the time and effort?
Um, this, I think, for this one, I can tell like creating the multiple choice questions. It takes a lot of time to do it on your own, but it ChatGPT does a like pretty amazing job in this. Like, yeah, it's so it saves a lot of time in that area. But you have to always be careful, like what was the uh, prompt and what's the options, and yeah. But in terms of English and Bangla, both it did a pretty good job.
I would like to echo something that Fred said earlier. It's going to be a very good ally if you have an activity that you just want to generate like varieties of. Like, I have this wonderful activity about vocabulary. Can you do it again, but now with these other words? And personally, I do find it very helpful when it comes to generating text that includes specific words. For instance, sometimes it's hard for me to come up with like a narrative that's on topic, but it's also fitting all of these words naturally, and it won't do a perfect job, but it gives me a departure point. I see it a lot, like I see Wikipedia, especially at the beginning, where you don't want to write your entire paper or essay or whatever you're working on, copy pasting from Wikipedia. However, it is a wonderful source to start digging and get your first references. I was very positively impressed at how it knew about some dialects, and it could generate simple sentences that put to contrast like some differences in the articles or the verbs that will have taken me quite some time. I can see them, I know how to verify them, but if I had to be the one to come up with them, it would have been very time consuming. And also the cultural aspects. In the case of Catalan, it brought up things that I was not aware of and that I'm certain the average Catalan speaker will not know of because there's a bit of insulation across regions. So at least in a culture that's under-resourced, but that has a very active population in putting content out there, I found it great because, of course, I was not trusting it, but I will go check and be positively surprised that, oh, wow, this actually exists and it got it right. Wow, I wouldn't have known how to even look for that because if I do a general search of mythological beasts, so much is gonna come up, and having just a specific name that it gave me
Mhm.
allows me to enrich my lessons in a way that I couldn't do, especially living in the US and not having access to libraries at home or sources that I will have otherwise.
Right. I guess to follow up on those two and kind of bring them all together, for me, I think that I usually tell people work within what you're an expert at. So if you're working within your expertise within AI, you're going to be better at verifying the information faster. You're going to know what it is you need. Instead of, having ChatGPT generate a lesson plan for you, you generate one activity, right? Because you can be very specific about the one activity that you want. And you might take a little more time in defining exactly what you want for that activity. But once you do get that activity that you like, then that's where ChatGPT's power really comes in, because then you can have it replicate that activity 100, 200 times. And that's where the true affordance here is not in its accuracy, it's in its speed and efficiency and unlimited qualities, right? You can just continue 20 times, 30 times, 40 times until you get to the point that you like it or where it's at. And then in terms of, given all of these sort of concerns with linguistic capabilities, one thing that we didn't talk too much about today, but it's, generating a text from nothing can be a good strategy, but usually I find starting with an authentic text and then constantly pushing it to simplify is going to usually be a better approach because it's at least rooted in an authentic text that you're working with. And in the process of simplifying it, you're creating lots of materials that you can then build things around. You can create vocabulary lists around and pre-reading questions, comprehension reading questions. You can turn the internet into your your own personal publishing repertoire. So
Yeah, I think, Fred, you're so right in that because sometimes we teaching languages went from a very artificial way to more natural ways with task-based language teaching and everything. And that is something that I don't really think much about, but it is something we need to put effort towards. And it is not falling back in our old ways. We've come all this way to make things relevant and real, and we shouldn't fall victim of the affordances of this technology. We can leverage it, but it shouldn't take away from a real experience. Like Mahbub was saying, like the dialogues were not like they will be between two Gen Zs, I believe it was. Um, there are expressions that it was ruling out in Catalan saying they were archaic, which they are not. And that's going to happen repeatedly with languages. And if we want to prepare our students for the real world, we need to use these tools as allies. But as Fred said, we are the experts. We are the ultimate judges. They are at best an assistant that requires quite some supervision.
Yeah, wonderful. All right. Well, not to cut us off, but it's been this is probably the longest interview we've done, but very packed full of very exciting. And I want to thank you all three very, very much. This has been wonderful. And so maybe we'll reconvene in a few months, in 6 months or whatever, do this again and see, what has changed, as I think it's going to be a moving target for sure. So, all righty. Thank you all very much and have a good afternoon.
Likewise.